Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Fantasy Reaction Show. My name is Andrew Velez, and I'm here with my co-host, Mr. Joel Dehls. We are here after the robbery of Monday Night Football. Philadelphia Eagles fall to the Atlanta Falcons in a 22-21 game. A game that, wow, completely owned by the Falcons until it wasn't, or excuse me, completely taken by the Philadelphia Eagles until it wasn't. Backs against the wall. The Atlanta Falcons, with a minute and 30 left, drive down the field in 5 plays to take this one away from Philadelphia in their home opener. Mr. Dehls, how are you doing tonight? I know you're an Eagles truther, Jaylen Herz truther, as am I, but how are we feeling after this L?
I'm in pain, man. Nothing but pain and misery. I thought Jalen Hurts played amazing this game. Up until that last play, I thought Jalen Hurts was having easily the best game of the season compared to week one against the Packers. Even going back to last season, you can make the argument this was his best game in the last 10 weeks of him as the starter for the Eagles. And everything was going great. They were able to move the ball. They had a couple really nice drives where he looked electric as a runner. I mean, it looked like he kind of had that second gear back. He looked explosive. He was accurate basically all game long. I think he had only 5 incompletions leading up to that final drive. And it looked like this was one of these classic Eagles games where it's kind of starts off a little bit slow, but second half they absolute dominate time possession. I think it was 21 to 8 at one point late into that fourth quarter where they were able to run the ball. Saquon was having it go and they were playing complimentary football on the other side. Again, that big stop on fourth down. And then that last drive comes. That last drive, first of all, hats off to the Falcons. Hats off to the Falcons because this was a must-win game. They play the Chiefs next week. Then they have the Saints. Then they have the Buccaneers. You have a real chance of starting 0-3 and 0-4, and everything really turns on your head. So this was about as must of a win as any game is come September. But man, I really thought Jalen Hurts was going to be able to go out in that final drive, go down and score. They just need a field goal. They needed 20, 30 maybe yards for Jake Elliott to get into field goal range. And it looked like he had Saquon wide open in the flat. Maybe there was another defender there. We'll see in the all 22. But I thought he'd just check it down to Saquon. Maybe you get 7, 8 yards, get out of bounds. You still have time, still have a timeout. Instead, he goes and takes a deep shot. Jesse Bates is back there. Smitty was pretty well covered, but Jesse Bates is back there lurking, gets the interception, and seals the game. Man, it really sucks because, of course, everyone is blaming Hurts, and I get it. That's part of the game. You throw the game-stealing interception, is what it is. But what really lost in the game was Saquon Barkley drop. Saquon was awesome for a majority of this game, but that final drop, which I thought was a great play call on third down, because if it's not open, you just take the sack. And instead of a 20-yard field goal, it's a 30-yard field goal. Jake Elliott's one of the best in the game. He probably makes that. But you have a really nice design where Saquon rolls down to the flat. He's wide open in the flat. Jalen Hurts gives him a perfect pass, and it goes off his fingertips. Saquon has 16 drops since 2021, the most by any running back. He's a great pass catcher. Like we saw in week one, the insane catch in the sideline, but he has these concentration drops too that just make you think what's going on here? Like this is one of the best running backs in football, and just a game-losing drop by Saquon, and then to compound that, the defense lets up a 5-play drive. You go right down the field, and on top of that, Jalen Hurts throws an interception. Basically, everything that had to go wrong for the Eagles to lose this game went wrong. Terrible drop, terrible defense, terrible interception within the last 3 minutes of the game to seal it. Really hurt to see as someone who's roots for Jalen Hurts. Of course, I want to see the Eagles succeed. But credit to Atlanta, man. Like I said, this is a must-win game, and they didn't show up for a lot of it. It was ugly for a long portion of this game, but they had the slimmest bit of hope in that fourth quarter, and they turned it around and won.
First off, shout out to Young Wei Koo. 3 for 3 on field goals, kicks the game-winning extra point after a penalty from Drake London. But of course, let's give credit where credit is due. The Atlanta Falcons had a lot of scrutiny after week one versus the Pittsburgh Steelers. And to me, a little bit of that was unfair to the fact that the Pittsburgh Steelers are the best defense in football. And you pair that with the fact it was Kirk Cousins' first game back off of a torn Achilles, and you going up against the best defense in football, arguably the best defensive player in football in TJ Watt. The pressure was going to be there, and he was playing in an offense that he has never played in before. He lined up in a bunch of pistol formations. First time, I believe, in his NFL career that he's ever lined up in pistol as much as he was. He just was completely uncomfortable. Today, we saw him back under center. He looked a lot more comfortable in the pocket, looked a lot more smooth, looked like he had a lot more power on his throws. But I want to give a lot of credit to the play callers for the Falcons. Shout out to Zach, because Zach went out there and he stayed true to the run game. We saw Bijan be wildly efficient on the ground, 14 for 97. And even Algier, before he went down with that injury, 9 for 53. He was also wildly efficient. But when you needed to have it the most, when you needed Kirk Cousins to step up to the plate and go ahead and lead a drive, he goes out there and it takes him 5 throws to get into the end zone. Dot after dot after dot, pushing the ball downfield. Shame on the Eagles for not adjusting their defense, playing too high, trying to take away the big play. And Kirk Cousins was meticulous and just picking his spots and was able to go down the field as easy as it gets. And on the opposite side, when you look at the Philadelphia Eagles, this was theirs. This was their game, and you're 100% right. Jaylen Herz played a pretty great game, pretty clean game. This was the most athletic that he's looked, the most comfortable that he's looked as a rusher in a long time. Definitely more athletic and more comfortable he's looked as a rusher from what we saw last season. He goes out there and he rushes for 85 yards on 13 carries, running through people, going with yards after contact as well. He just looked like he wanted to win today. And that's why when you go out there and the defense lets you down, but when you have a chance to go out there and close the game, you simply have to do that. Saquon Barkley needs to bring in that catch. Although he was pretty great in his own right, 22 for 95, has that 2-point conversion that he goes on a second effort to get into the end zone. You have to go ahead and catch that ball, because then you have opportunities like that where we saw last season. I believe ESPN put that graphic up. They lost 3 games when they were winning, but with 2 minutes left in the game. And it was kind of one of those that they wrote their destiny for them. And of course the defense lets up, but Hurts making that decision to throw the ball deep downfield. I think he had a little bit more time than he thought. Not time in the pocket, because obviously the pressure was there, but more so time on the clock. See that flat to Saquon, like you mentioned. Take the yards, call another timeout, and give yourself a second life. You only needed a field goal. You try to go there for the glory, and you try to go and have yourself a big play, similar to how Kirk played, and then you end up being the butt of a lot of people's joke, even after you had a pretty clean game right up until the last play for you. So, of course, this is going to hurt Philadelphia agendas. It's definitely not going to benefit you and or Riv, but it'll be a fun podcast tomorrow. I'm looking forward to that. But when it comes to fantasy football, you'll take a Jaylen Herz performance like we saw today, and it's going to leave you nothing with optimism moving forward. As a rusher, I'm smiling ear to ear. This is exactly what I imagined when of course everyone drafts Jaylen Herz. But as a passer without AJ Smith, 23 of 30, throwing for $180 obviously isn't ideal, but was very efficient with his opportunity. Smitty was fantastic today as well. 7 for 70, if I'm not mistaken, gets into the end zone as well. But man, if you are a Philadelphia Eagles fans, shout out to Zaquo. He goes and says 97% chance to win this game at one point in time. This was an absolute robbery from the Atlanta Falcons.
Yeah, and this is going to be a game that it's week 2. It's September, right? Like, of course, people are going to get their jokes off, but these are 2 teams that could easily be competing for a wild card spot, and we're going to look back at this game and say this could be a deciding factor between potentially a tiebreaker between these 2 teams. And I'm glad you talked about Atlanta, because I was basically just, over here in pity about the Philadelphia Eagles, but Kirk Cousins looked way better. I mean, he was under center. He was with play. He was using play action. He was moving around a hell of a lot more than he was in week 1. So talk about the fantasy aspect of it, right? Kirk Cousins is 20 for 29, 240 yards, 2 touchdowns, 117 passer rating. He looked pretty damn good, right? He had maybe 1 or 2 throws that were a little off, but for the most part, this looked like the Kirk Cousins we saw a lot with the Minnesota Vikings. Looking at the receiving core, Darnell Mooney has 3 for 88 and a touchdown. He could have had even more if he had that one play that he kind of just gave up on, where Kirk led him to the sideline. And if he would have kept running, probably could have got another 30, 40 yards. We talk about Darnell Mooney having 100, 120-yard game, but instead just 88 yards. Drake London gets his game saved with a touchdown late there, gets 7 targets. Kyle Pitts, I think, is probably like the biggest talking point from the Atlanta side of things, because this was a guy who, of course, we know rookie year has 1,000 yards, breakout season for a rookie tight end, most since Mike Ditka. He gets banged up the next couple of seasons. And this year with Kirk, it's supposed to be really like, this is the year he comes back and is that standout tight end that he was drafted top 5 to be. But week 1, he got saved with a touchdown. This game, just 3 for 20 with 4 targets. I feel like he was being drafted about where he was, it almost felt like the floor in some cases because his upside is so damn high. But 3 for 20 after last week's game, where he only has about 20 or 30 receiving yards, he doesn't really seem like someone you could trust week to week. Then talking about Philly real quick, of course, we heard A.J. Brown, right? He's going to be out what sounds like a couple of weeks. I don't know if that includes this week, but he, of course, missed this game. Sounds like there's a probably better than 50% chance he misses next game. Smitty goes out there 7 for 76. He's going to get a bump, of course, in this offense. But outside of that, not much else happened, right? Dallas Goedert saw some targets, but was only able to pull in 3 for 38. Covey, who had a decent game for like PPR because he got 6 receptions, but it was mostly screen and short stuff, just 23 yards. A.J. Brown is out. So this passing attack is going to take a step down. The offense is going to take a step down. And usually we see guys step up, but really in this offense, Smitty gets a bump, but I don't look at Dallas Goedert and really any other option on this team. Jahan Dotson, of course, is someone that is working as the wide receiver 3. I don't see anyone else on this team really stepping up and being like, okay, Dallas Goedert, he's someone you could start right now. If you're in a pinch, if you had an injury to tight end, okay, sure, he should see some more targets, some more work, but he's just not involved in this offense enough to really be able to trust him week to week. So my biggest takeaways from the fantasy perspective is Kyle Pitts just week after week feels like he's losing more and more trust in fantasy managers' eyes. And on Philadelphia's side, A.J. Brown's going to miss some time, so the offense is going to come down a bit. But outside of Devonta Smith, I don't see much changing within this offense.
And then on the Falcons side, listen, Drake London obviously ends with 54 and a touchdown, 6 catches, a beautiful stat line. He got saved by that last drive. Without that touchdown, we're talking about a modest performance from Drake London. He would have been one of those guys that we would have been talking about. Is it time to get concerned with? Similarly to how we're talking about Kyle Pitts right now. I like the connection that I saw from Darnell Mooney and, of course, Kirk Cousins. You understand that a majority of the priority of attention is going to be put onto Drake London. He is the best wide receiving option. So that means Darnell Mooney is going to get, more often than not, solid advantages, good mismatches. But regardless, Drake London simply is too talented to not have that opportunity. I'm very interested to see how they do look next week. However, Drake London, of course, salvages, goes and has a touchdown. We know what he can do when the ball's in his hands, just a matter of giving him that opportunity. The fact that both him and Darnell Mooney had the same amount of targets, that is something that I'm interested in. But one thing that I can't say like I'm overly surprised at, for the idea that Kirk Cousins, for majority of his tenure, at least his Vikings tenure, he was a spread the love kind of quarterback. We saw TJ be relevant. We saw Jordan Addison be relevant. Jettis be relevant, all in the same week. So it's not out of the realm of possibility that we continue to see this offense get a little bit better more and more as Kirk does feel more comfortable in this offense. Because again, we saw Bijan be uber efficient on the ground, have himself an amazing fantasy performance. Darnell, Drake London, the only one that we're missing out of this equation is Kyle Pitts. And again, I don't know if I'm going to not holding my breath on that. He's going to have to prove it to us inevitably before we start to really start to give him credit or give him praise. But right now, again, if Kirk Cousins is going to look like this, and he's going to get more comfortable in this pocket, more comfortable in this Zach Robinson offense, I really like the upside of this team. This was the game where I said to myself, I'm going to give Kirk Cousins this opportunity. He's deserved that. He's earned that. The Steelers are way too good of a defense to judge Kirk Cousins of his future with the Atlanta Falcons on, especially after one game. And he went out there, and although it was the last drive of the game for them, he went out there and he shut a lot of people up. Kirk Cousins is far from washed. He still is one of the better quarterbacks. He just needed some time to get into his groove. And of course, he showed that he still can get the job done at a high level.
Yeah, and if you don't have that last drive, you're leaving this game, and it's like we just scored 15 points against the Eagles, who are looked at as having one of the worst offenses in football, or excuse me, one of the worst defenses in football. The ground game was going. Bijan and Algier were able to muster up yards, super efficient on the ground. And you're looking around like we just paid this dude 200 million, 160, whatever it was, $200 million, and we can't do anything through the air through 2 weeks. So, of course, getting the W is huge, but I still think the whole, obviously, the way the Saints have looked kind of changes the entire outlook on the NFC South. But my preconceived notions coming into the year was this Falcons team should be great. The defense was solid last year, the offensive line, the passing game, but really outside of that one drive, it did take a bit for this passing game to click. But either way, shout out to the Falcons, big W. Let's get into the studs and duds.
All right, let's do it. Studs, of course, we had some awesome performances. Probably the best performance of them all outside of the obvious. At the quarterback position, I should say. K1, Kyler Murray, quarterback one on the week. 266, 17 of 21, 3 touchdowns. Everything Kyler did, it turned into gold. He had 5 carries for 55 yards. This is the type of performance you anticipate out of a Kyler Murray. He is simply too good to put forth a performance like he did against the Buffalo Bills and against a respectable Rams team who, of course, was banged up with injury. He went out there and he answered a lot of doubters, including, listen, the guys on the Pick Aside podcast who were very critical of his comments about Marvin Harrison. He figured it out. He knew what he had to do, and they went out there and executed at the super high level. Now, you look at his schedule for these next 6 weeks, Detroit, Washington, San Francisco, Green Bay, the Chargers, and Miami. There's not a quarterback that I want on my team more than Kyler Murray right now, especially with this upcoming schedule. He's going to be a top quarterback every single one of these weeks because all of those matchups are as lucrative as they get. Next one. This one may be where we have a little bit of conversation. Derek Carr. Quarterback 2 this week. And right now, you're quarterback 1 through the first 2 weeks of the NFL season. Like we all guessed, like we all anticipated. 11 for 16, 243 yards, 2 touchdowns, an INT. He is only rostered in 12% of leagues. But the kicker here, the Saints have scored or had scored on their first 15 drives to start the season. Put up 47 points against the Panthers, put up 44 points against the Dallas Cowboys, which we thought would be infinitely better than what the Panthers were for obvious reasons. My big questions was the offensive line. How is that going to look against a much, much better pass rush from the Dallas Cowboys? That did not matter to Derek Carr. And of course, the New Orleans Saints, they did whatever they wanted. But the question now becomes, is he a must rostered quarterback in 1 quarterback leagues? Because in 2 quarterback leagues, I feel like it's obvious, especially after you combine for over 90 points in 2 weeks. But in 1 quarterback leagues, do you trust Derek Carr as your lone QB?
You have to at this point. They've been so efficient. We're going to talk about some more Saints later on by just how efficient they've been. Derek Carr right now, do you know where he ranks in pass attempts?
If I had to guess, let me guess 21st.
He's 30th. He is 30th in pass attempts, yet he is QB1 in fantasy football. This has been, I mean, probably the most efficient offense I've seen in my life. Shout out to Sean McVay, Shanahan, all of them guys. But this Clint Kubiak offense has been insane. I think the better question is, who are you dropping for Derek Carr, right? Because in 1 quarterback leagues, it's easy to have Kyler and Anthony Richardson and Lamar and all of these dudes who, have the same ceiling that as what Derek Carr is showing, as crazy as that might sound. But when you're looking at guys that you drafted over him, right, that are more pocket only guys like Jared Goff, for example, right, Matthew Stafford, guys that were going ahead of Derek Carr, because Derek Carr was one of, if not the last quarterback taken in your draft. More often than not, as you mentioned, 12% rostered. He was undrafted in a majority of leagues. So if you had an injury, especially a guy like Jordan Love, Derek Carr is someone I'm going out there and picking up right away. In Superflex leagues, I'm sure he was picked up by a lot of teams after that week 1 performance. But this week 2 really solidified it, I think, for us and for a ton of people around the league, because putting up 40 on Carolina is one thing. Putting up 40 on Dallas, in Dallas, after what we've seen them do this past year, specifically in 2023, outside of the playoff game, how great that defense played at home. This shows this wasn't a one-time thing for the New Orleans Saints. This is a team that's going to be probably one of the highest scoring teams in football this year. So, like, we don't like CJ Stroud for fantasy football. CJ Stroud or Derek Carr?
Oh, I still don't think I can cross that threshold. I'm still gonna lean CJ. I respect the hell out of Derek Carr and what he's done these first 2 weeks. I'm gonna lean CJ Stroud. I still believe that that offense is way too high upside for me to go to Derek Carr after 2 weeks.
Jaden Daniels or Derek Carr?
I think that's where we can have a conversation, man. And I get it. The rushing upside for Jaden Daniels is there every single week. I feel like that's what he's looking to do first before pass the football. I think Derek Carr, with how effective this offense and how efficient this offense has been, I think Derek Carr might be an answer there.
Last one, Brock Purdy.
Debo getting hurt, no CMC. I'm taking Derek right now. This is a conversation I don't feel good having, but how can I feel different after? Hey, listen, Dallas has been fool's gold at a good amount of time for a majority of our time watching NFL football. However, that defense is still one you have to respect. And if a team goes out there and puts up 40 on your head top comfortably without really breaking a sweat, I feel like I have to be moved. So I'll lean Derek Carr, truthfully.
Yeah, I mean, I'm with you. Like the upside, the allure of Jaden Daniels being this dual threat quarterback, and he's still at the end of the year could finish higher than Derek Carr, but the way the Saints offense is clicking, like, God forbid one of these games they have to throw the ball in the second half. Like, they've been up like 20 points in these first 2 games, and that's why Derek Carr is 30th in pass attempts. So if there's a game where the other team can stick around and all of a sudden Derek Carr has to throw it 35 times, who knows what can happen. But I don't want to get ahead of myself, right? Because it's just 2 weeks into the season. But you have to start looking at Derek Carr and the Saints offense like we look at Brock Purdy, like we look at Jared Goff, right? Where we know the individual talent of these quarterbacks. Obviously, you're not Josh Allen, you're not Lamar Jackson, you're not some upper echelon type dude. But the system, especially this offensive line, which looked amazing against Dallas, and your offensive coordinator with the weapons you have is able to elevate this quarterback from, probably talent-wise, like a bottom 10 to 15 quarterback in the league, that to, for fantasy football, a guy that could be top 10.
Now, the last one I want to talk about was my start of the week, and it seems like this is becoming my guy. Baker Mayfield, quarterback 4 this week. It seems like I'm just going to have to be up here and every single week start singing his praises because, truthfully, as a passer, he wasn't this end-all, be-all kind of guy. Threw for $180, gets into the end zone, did have an INT that I thought was a great play by Brian Branch, but 5 for 34 and a rushing touchdown. And honestly, the move that he put on Rodriguez left him for dead. One of the few plays after that goes and gets into the end zone, had a nice touchdown to Chris Godwin. This Bucs offense is extremely fun to watch, and Baker Mayfield has been one of the more exciting quarterbacks so far in fantasy football as well. He's going out there, and if he has a plus matchup, I'm sending him with an extreme amount of confidence. He's just giving me a safe floor that I simply can't overlook. So let me give some love to Baker Mayfield as my last stud.
I'll go into a couple of mine. So Sam Darnold, I think, has proven himself to be firmly in a quarterback 2 mix going forward, right? In those super flex leagues as your second quarterback, I would feel very comfortable with. He's top 10 in passing yards, 3rd in passing touchdowns, 5th in passer rating. He also gave you 32 rushing yards against San Francisco. He has mobility in his game. We saw the 97-yard bomb to Justin Jefferson. He had a couple of really nice throws as well over the middle of the field. What he's shown in Kevin O'Connell's offense with Justin Jefferson there now, if Justin Jefferson does have to miss next week, which it doesn't sound like he has to, but if Jettas goes down, I think you have to downgrade him. But as long as he is out there, I think Darnold is a pretty comfortable top 15-ish quarterback in fantasy football. Gino Smith and Ryan Grubb's offense, it's basically everything we were hoping for. He has 2 top 7 finishes already this season. He won against New England in a matchup that I was a bit scared for if you had Gino Smith, because we have seen how great New England's defense was last year and, of course, in week 1 against the Bengals. But it didn't matter for Gino. He put up 327 passing yards, 75% completion percentage. He was charged with 0 off-target throws. First time since 2021, a quarterback had 40 or more dropbacks, an average up target of 8 yards or more, and 0 off-target throws. He was elite in this comeback win, 14 of 17 while they were trailing, elite against the blitz, 10 of 12 against the blitz. Gino was one of my favorite kind of late round dart throws in fantasy, especially in like those one quarterback leagues. Jared Goff was my favorite. I'll own up to that. But Gino, super late, right when you're talking past the Jared Goffs, Jaden Daniels. I really love this Ryan Grubb offense, and he's looked great so far. The last one I want to mention is just Deshaun Watson, because it's ugly. We all shit on Deshaun Watson, I think deservedly so. But to talk from a fantasy football perspective, he had a top 10 performance against the Jags. He's not a good quarterback. I know he's not a good quarterback. We all know he's not a good quarterback. But he has a couple decent matchups coming up. He gets the Giants, Vegas, which is tough, Washington, Philly, and Cincy over these next 5 weeks. And I'm not trying to make excuses for him because he has his own issues as a quarterback, but there's been some really bad drops. 2 by Amari Cooper that potentially could have gone for touchdowns in these last 2 weeks. As a whole, the Browns have had 15% of passes dropped, which is the second highest rate in the NFL. One quarterback leagues, we're not starting Deshaun Watson. This is more super flex leagues, right? If you lost Jordan Love, if you have Matt Stafford, for example, and you don't have Puka, you don't have Cooper Kupp, he's not worthless, right? And I'm sure there's fantasy managers out there who have Deshaun Watson. They listen to whether it's Pick a Side or someone else on national media say how terrible Deshaun Watson is, and he's bad. For fantasy football, I still think he could be a QB2 for you.
Now, the one I want to show love to is Gino Smith. That was one of my guys coming into the season. Not my actual guy, but it seemed like every single league that I was in, Gino Smith ended up on a team of mine, especially in those 2 quarterback leagues. I took my great quarterback, and I knew that I was going to have the luxury of waiting multiple rounds and finessing a Gino Smith in a bounce-back season with so many weapons on this team, a new play caller, and it's showing dividends already. If you can go out there and you can perform at that high of a level versus a very high-level defense in the New England Patriots, to me, the sky's the limit. A lot of great signs were shown to me this past weekend from the Seattle Seahawks. But let's move over to the dud section of the quarterbacks. Now, there's a few of them and some decent names. You have Caleb Williams, goes and throws for 174, 2 INTs against the Houston Texans, finishes as your QB 29. Caleb was not good. And I fear the worst for Caleb. He was a guy that you and I were both high on, especially in fantasy football, because we thought, 1, he has the generational tag. We thought that he had all the traits to be great. And 2, of course, all the weapons that are on this offense. How could it go wrong? I can give you a couple examples or a couple reasons why. Keenan Allen, injured. Roma Dunze also injured, but did play. Wasn't that great yesterday. DJ Moore, is he washed? Time will tell. He looks like he needed to show some more effort in the preseason because he's looking slow off of his beginning of his routes. And then, of course, Shane Waldron. This offensive play calling is pretty horrendous. I really don't like what I'm seeing from it, but it's one of those where you want to talk about players that I could drop for Derek Carr. Caleb Williams is easily a drop for me for Derek Carr at this point in time. He hasn't been good, and it's one of those that he's going to have to prove it to us before we start to adjust into our lineups. Next one I want to talk about is Matthew Stafford. Matthew Stafford, quarterback 31. He goes for 19 to 27, 216 yards. But the reason why this one is a good conversation is for the fact that also you don't have Cooper Kupp. He's going to miss a good amount of time. Puka Nacua is going to miss a good amount of time. The offensive line's banged up to oblivion. You have Kyron Williams. You have Whittington. You have Demarcus Robinson. Parkins. The tight end. I'm blanking on his name.
Yeah. Colby.
Thank you very much. How confident are we in Matthew Stafford moving forward to be fantasy relevant against the Arizona Cardinals defense that we understand is not great by any means? He goes out there and throws us 6 fantasy points. Moving forward, me personally, I can't trust that he's going to be beneficial in fantasy football. That's one of those we're going to have to wait and see how the young kid Whittington looks in this offense. Is he going to continue to elevate guys like a Demarcus Robinson? Of course, Stafford is amazing in that regard and elevating talent around him. But right now, especially after a game versus a horrible defense, I get that it's a division game, but it's still not a great sign for things to come.
Yeah, I'm definitely nervous about Matt Stafford right now. He's one of the best quarterbacks in football, right? I think entering the year, we had him as like 6th, 7th best quarterback. And when he has all the weapons, when he has Puka and when he has Cooper Kupp and the offensive line is healthy, we see how great he can be. But we also see when those weapons fall, which both of these guys have been injury prone, talking about the receivers, and the offensive line deteriorates. He's an immobile, older quarterback with a lot of guys that, separate, that struggle to separate one-on-one. And no matter how great Sean McVay might be as a play caller, no matter how great Kyron Williams might be as a running back, it's hard to overcome all of that, especially when you have zero rushing upside with Matthew Stafford. So when you're looking at kind of the bottom of the barrel fantasy quarterbacks, it's hard to put Matt Stafford in your lineup right now, right? Like Gino Smith, it's easy to put over him. Baker Mayfield, easy to put over him. Derek Carr, easy to put over him. All of these guys that were getting drafted way after Matthew Stafford entering this season. And it really feels like both of these guys, Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua, they're going to be out for probably at least a month. Like Puka, we already heard it's going to be a minimum of 6 weeks. Cooper Kupp sounds like there's a pretty strong chance he's going to be on IR, which means easy 3-4 weeks. I believe they have a week 6 bye. So we're talking about 5 weeks potentially of Matthew Stafford not being able to be fantasy relevant. And even in a really plus matchup, right, against the Arizona Cardinals, a defense we thought he could take advantage of, wasn't able to get anything going. Now, to his defense, the game got out of hand real quick, right? This was like a 20, 30-point game, and it felt like in a blink of an eye. And your offense and everything just gets kind of thrown up in the air, and everything gets torn apart when you're down that much that early. But it's really hard to trust Matt Stafford moving forward with all these injuries.
All right, you can get into your quarter. Oh, actually, I do have one more, and this one is worth mentioning to me, talking about the duds. It's going to be Justin Fields. Now, Justin Fields was one of those that it was an idea. Justin Fields coming to the season, there was the idea that he could come into this Pittsburgh offense, and because he has such great upside as a mobile quarterback, that he was going to be a very lucrative fantasy option. In 2 weeks, respectively, 11 fantasy points, finishes outside the top 20. And these are against respectable defenses, I'll say, the Atlanta Falcons and, of course, the Denver Broncos. But it's not one that I'm excited about. This was one that, of course, he was supposed to come in and just straight out, show that he could steal a job from Russell Wilson. To me, they have him game managing at the highest of high levels. Even the rushing upside, maybe we saw a little bit of it versus the Falcons. Definitely not versus the Denver Broncos this past week. So that's one of those that I wanted to look at and say, Justin Fields, a lot of the love that people give him is fantasy football related. And even right now in fantasy football, he's not showing you the results that you may have wanted, especially for someone that you got for a very cheap price. Right now, that's not paying dividends.
Yeah, not at all. I was a bit surprised. I have been a bit surprised that he hasn't been more relevant for fantasy. Week 1, he had 14 rushing attempts, 57 rushing yards. Like, if you're getting that as a baseline as a quarterback, you're typically having a good week. But when you have 150 passing yards, 0 touchdowns rushing or passing, it's going to be hard to be anything decent. He was QB 19 in week 1 this past week, QB 24. You mentioned it. He's game managing throughout this offense right now. The Steelers are just playing not to lose, and the way their defense is playing the first 2 weeks, I don't blame them. As you mentioned, best defense in football right now, I think, stamped without a doubt. So we saw last season, Justin Fields, he had a couple of games. I think he had 2 games, 4 passing touchdowns. He had at least 1 game with 300 passing yards. So we had a couple of games where it wasn't just the rushing, but he had some passing there too. But the Steelers like, yeah, now we're not going to do this. You're going to have like 20, 21 attempts. You could run the ball maybe 10 times per game, but they haven't been able to score touchdowns. Well, they have 1 touchdown on the season right now, right? It's against the Broncos. So it's just difficult to be fantasy relevant. But moving on to some of my duds, Anthony Richardson, I think, is the number 1 dud this week for me. This was really his first game as a starter who started and finished, right? Didn't go out to injury, where it was a complete no-show from fantasy. You saw all the bad with Anthony Richardson in this game against the Packers. He was wildly inaccurate. He only had a handful of rushing attempts, just 4 rushing attempts. We saw only completed 50% of his passes, and the Colts didn't score a touchdown until the very end of the fourth quarter. There was like 2-3 minutes left. They had to get an onside kick. They were not able to score a touchdown, really put any points on this Packers defense. But I'm not panicking. I don't think anyone should be panicking about Anthony Richardson. Again, this is a quarterback that, for completely different reasons, has a bit of Deshaun Watson kind of negative press around him, because everyone thinks that he's just so wildly inaccurate. He's a bad quarterback and a bad processor. So sometimes that could get seeped into people's fantasy football perceptions on him. But if anyone's panicking on Anthony Richardson, go and get him. I still think he has top 5 upside. Another guy that I think we could mention kind of in the Matthew Stafford mold is Justin Herbert. I don't think he should be rostered in single quarterback leagues right now. Derek Carr, easily over him. Baker Mayfield, easily over him. Gino, even Deshaun Watson, I think is a real conversation. It's just not a passing offense I want anything to be a part of. He hasn't thrown for more than 145 yards yet this season, and our preseason expectations were correct, right? This is going to be Greg Roman. You're running the shit out of the football. They had 38 rushing attempts, not including Justin Herbert. With Justin Herbert, this is over 40 rushing attempts against the Carolina Panthers. I understand you're winning the whole game. I understand the Panthers suck and you don't have to throw the ball. But even in that week 1 game against the Raiders, where it was a game, right? This could go either way. This was a neutral game script. You could run or pass. They were not trying to pass the ball at all. And they're 2-0, and they looked pretty damn good being 2-0. So I don't think it's going to change from a just mindset perspective of run the ball, run the ball, run the ball. And last name I'll mention is just Jared Goff. Hasn't been good yet. Has not been good yet. My guy, Jared Goff, has not been good yet through 2 weeks against great matchups. The Rams and the Bucks, huge over-unders. So many fantasy points to be had in that dome. QB 18 week 1, QB 23 week 2, only 1 passing touchdown. I'm not out yet. I still believe, not just because I have him in damn near every single fantasy league, him and Cooper Kupp, rest in peace, Cooper Kupp, but I've seen back-to-back years now of him executing this offense at a high level, and this past game against the Bucks was maybe his worst game as a Detroit Lion. He was horrible. The fact that, listen, he has to be better, but 55 pass attempts, that's not really who the Detroit Lions are, right? You've got the best running back duo in football, and he should be playing off that. So I feel like they just got a bit away from the game plan in that game. But Jared Goff has just executed this offense too well for the last 2 seasons to make me think that he's just going to fade into oblivion and be worthless for fantasy football and just destroy the Detroit Lions. So first 2 weeks, it hasn't been great, but I'm not giving up on Goff just yet.
I think better days are ahead for Jared Goff, but I'll be transparent with you, Joel. He was the worst player on the Lions team on Sunday. He was horrible. Terrible. He was absolutely terrible to watch. And watching that game back, I'm like, man, Amon-Ra really balled out. Jameson Williams balled the hell out. Sam Laporta, where are you? That's something that we're going to talk about a little bit later. Jahmyr Gibbs, do your thing, young man. Montgomery, you get into the end zone, sure. But when you need a play, Jared Goff simply couldn't get it done. Now, you have Arizona, Seattle, Dallas. Minnesota's not a good matchup. That's one that we're going to start talking about and respecting from here on out. Minnesota's defense is one of those that I'm pretty concerned about when it comes to fantasy. But then Tennessee, Green Bay. I mean, there's some good matchups there, so maybe there is some optimism left there. But he's one of those that you're going to have to prove it to me. Derek Carr, I'm taking you over Jared Goff right now. It's one of those that's one of those names that I would feel comfortable taking over him as well. He's not doing it right now. There's too much talent on this team, too much talent on this offense for him to be playing as lackluster as he has. So that's one that, we're monitoring and we're definitely being mindful, but it's not one that you love. Let's read some super chats and then we'll get into the running backs, studs and duds. Shout out to Chris Bass. Bryce Huff will have 2+ sacks, said Joel V. Moran. And he goes out there and he tweeted immediately, Howie Roseman may have whiffed on this Bryce Huff signing. It hasn't been great. Not even a little bit. Freeholder 33 says, Eagles loss ends in an INT. LMAO, I love this life. Somebody probably lost on a Jaylen Herz INT to end the game, and that's sad truth. Hertz and Purdy losses, about to go pop a honey pack.
Honey pack is nuts.
That caught me off guard. It's one of those that you understand it after you read it. That's funny. Listen, man, you go enjoy that. However, let's get into these running back studs. RB1, the best performance probably of the season will be Alvin Kamara, and it's already week 2. 3 touchdowns, 115 yards on 20 carries. He goes 2 catches, 65 yards, and another touchdown to add on to it. It was Christmas all over again. Of course, I was on the receiving end of it once again. Second most points in my league. I lose to, of course, the most points in the league because he did have Alvin Kamara, but they called him washed. Some called him washed. I won't call out any names, but they called Alvin Kamara washed. Sometimes you need to respect the legend. And that's exactly what Alvin Kamara is, RB1 on the season. He's going to be dominant, especially in this Clint Kubiak offense. If we're giving Derek Carr some love, we definitely have to give Alvin Kamara his love as well. Now, listen, this name I have to show some love because this has been one of my guys. Ramondre Stevenson finishes as your RB12, 21 carries, 81 yards. Last week had over 20 carries, had over 100 yards and a touchdown as well. 17 fantasy points. And with his matchups coming up in the next 3 weeks, you have the Jets, who haven't been great at stopping the run, San Francisco, and the Miami Dolphins. There is not a situation where I don't have Ramondre Stevenson in my lineup. It's getting to the point where Ramondre Stevenson is a must start every single week. They are working off of the run game, and Ramondre Stevenson as a workhorse is a must start. And the last name I want to talk about, who I feel like is an obvious name at this point, especially because CMC is going to be on IR for a while. Jordan Mason proved that it wasn't just a week 1 fluke against the New York Jets. He's legit. As your running back 10 this week, 20 carries and 100 yards. For those that can't do math, 5 yards a carry and a touchdown. I mean, this guy is amazing. Yards after contact, running through guys. He is an amazing running back. And if you are able to either 1, draft him as your handcuff with CMC, 2, get him off waiver wire as you had CMC on your team and you kind of made that mistake, but were lucky enough to get him back. Or 3, you were the smart guy that said, screw that manager that has CMC. I want Jordan Mason. You're living life because this man in a Shanahan offense is going to be a stud every single week. So I want to give him some love because it's deserved.
Yeah, and all of the advanced numbers love him too, right? Yards after contact, missed tackles forced, he's been a dog. And Ramondre Stevenson, I think my biggest issue or my biggest fear coming into this year was I thought the Patriots were going to be a joke, at least offensively, right? I knew the defense, like, this is going to be a solid defense. I don't know if I thought it was going to be this good as at least what we've seen for the first couple of weeks, but so far New England's shown that they're at a minimum going to be competitive. And if you could stay within a touchdown for most of these games, Ramondre can get 20 plus attempts. And if he's getting that, he could be a workhorse and he could average 4 to 5 yards a carry. When he gets to the goal line, he's going to be that dude. So even with Antonio Gibson back in week 2, or at least more involved in the offense, it really didn't matter. Ramondre, of course, is that guy. Moving on, though, to my running back studs, J.K. Dobbins. We talked about him in week 1. We have to talk about him again in week 2. He is also must-start territory. I mean, is it crazy to call him like a low-end RB1 going forward? Tough matchup this week against the Steelers, but who the hell cares, right? He's been so damn good. 17 carries for 130 yards and a touchdown. He's looked explosive, had another 45-yard run. This time finished it for a touchdown. He's had 7 runs of 10-plus yards on 27 carries this season. No running back in the NFL has forced more tackles per carry than J.K. Dobbins. He's been insane. One of the best picks in fantasy football. I've been able to get him in those teens. Just kind of a dart throw. Like maybe he could become the guy in the LA backfield. But no matter how high you were on J.K. Dobbins, I don't know if anyone was predicting how good he would be right here. Moving on to another running back stud, Devon Achane. We talked about him a bit last week on Thursday, but just wanted to bring him up a little bit more because Mike McDaniel had an interesting quote today. I think Achane is the only player in this Miami offense that doesn't take a pretty drastic hit with Tua being out. He's coming off a 29-touch game against Miami, his best game as a pro, in my opinion, when it comes to workload involved. And McDaniel said today, it's hard not to give guys that opportunity that are really thirsting for the ball. They're doing something with it. All he's done is give us more reasons to give him the ball. His number one issue, or at least fantasy analysts and people who are wondering what we do with Achane this offseason, how many touches is he going to get? Part of this is because Raheem Mostert was banged up, but he just proved he could take 29 carries on a short week while he was banged up. If he can do that, he could be a workhorse for this Miami Dolphins offense. And of course, it's scary with Skylar Thompson, but this is a guy that is too explosive, is too great to not be fantastic, no matter who is at quarterback. Last person I want to shout out is James Conner. He's still really fucking good, man. He leads the league in avoided tackles, 3.5 yards after contact per rush, 41 touches, 205 yards, and 2 touchdowns so far this season. He's been the workhorse for the Cardinals. We were expecting that coming into this year. Trey Benson has gotten involved here and there. DeMarcado has gotten involved here and there. But in the passing game, it's James Conner. The goal line is James Conner. And he's been spectacular so far for the Cardinals.
Now, let's move on to our running back duds. And now you and I had some similar overlap because there were just obvious duds. My sit of the week was DeAndre Swift. I really fear this Houston Texans rush defense moving forward, blanketed and shut down Jonathan Taylor, who averaged 3 yards of carries, 3 yards a carry on 16 attempts. And DeAndre Swift, who was my sit of the week, RB31, 14 carries, 18 yards. I mean, absolutely yuck. 4 catches, 24 yards, maybe, because that gave him 18.3 fantasy points and kind of made him I don't absolutely hate this guy type of performance, but on the ground, it's been disgusting for him. Obviously, very inefficient in this game, 10 for 30 against the Tennessee Titans on opening weekend. It's not one that I love, not one that I'm moving forward and I feel confident in. The only thing that gives me a little bit of optimism would be him in the passing game. But right now, how can you feel optimistic about that passing game, especially for the Chicago Bears and how poor it's looked? Next one I want to shout out, and then you can get into yours, would be Joe Mixon, RB33, after being one of the best performances in fantasy football last week. RB33, 9 carries, 25 yards, 3 catches, 5 targets, 25 yards. I didn't know if it was the best matchup, and Joe Mixon obviously did go down in this game at a certain point as well, did return, which was huge for them. But I'm still firing Joe Mixon up. He's still in a great high-powered offense that teams are going to be playing the pass, and that's going to leave running lanes open for him. He's also being catered to in the passing game as well. So this is one of those that don't think about it too much. If he's healthy, you send him out there with confidence.
Yeah, and it seems like the ankle injury doesn't believe to be too serious. Even before he went down injured, though, he was not effective. I think he was 7 carries for 20 yards pre-injury, and then he came back. He was in for a handful of plays, but I don't think he finished the game, if I'm remembering correctly. We'll see if he's playing next week. If he's out, Cam Akers is probably the guy to pick up there. A couple duds that I'll highlight here. Zach Moss is the clear RB1 for the Cincinnati Bengals, but so far, it really hasn't mattered for fantasy football. Moss in week 2 had 82% of snaps to Chase Brown's 18%. He had 12 carries. He ran 20 routes, but turned into just 5.7 fantasy points. So for all the talk we had in this offseason, Chase Brown, Zach Moss, pass catching, pass protection, all of this stuff, it really hasn't mattered, right? Chase Brown has been more efficient on far less carries, to be fair, averaging 6 yards per carry to Moss's 3.7, but they don't trust Chase Brown in pass protection at all. He's had 0 snaps in pass protection. That's where we see Zach Moss on the field a ton. The other running back I wanted to highlight is just Rachaad White. A bit worried about him, just a bit worried because, number one, he's dealing with the groin injury, right? I think it's not too serious. I'm expecting him to play next week, but that's something he's dealing with that's probably going to limit his mobility just a bit going into next week. The efficiency has been dreadful. I mean, the offensive line, the run blocking unit has not been great either, but he's averaging 1.96 yards per carry. And Bucky Irvin wasn't great in week 2, but in week 1, he was phenomenal. He averaged 7 yards a carry, got 7 carries as well in week 2. So he's into the workload just a little bit. But so far, the efficiency, which we know for Rachaad White, that's not his calling card. The efficiency has never been there. He's been like a under 4 yards per carry type dude. He's just been heavily involved in the passing game. But I think Bucky Irvin kind of being in the shadows. If he's out on a waiver wire, definitely someone I'm looking to pick up this, on Tuesday when waivers run, or I guess on Wednesday. But Rachaad White, I don't know if we're going to see that same top 12, top 10 guy that we saw last season.
1 target this past weekend, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, he only played like 20-30% of snaps, I think. So it was kind of a throwaway week. But yeah, not if he's not involved in the passing game, he's basically useless.
Yeah, I don't know if I love Rachaad White. He was one of those guys that I faded all in almost every single draft of mine. I don't have any stock in Rachaad White this season. And Baker Mayfield showing he does not need Rachaad White to be successful in the passing game. We see Chris Godwin being a fantasy dog. Mike Evans didn't have the best of game this weekend, but of course he dominated week 1 versus the Commanders. So it'll be interesting that offensive dynamic. And I feel like without Dave Canales calling plays as well, we won't see the running back be as featured in this offense. But let's get over to the wide receiver studs. We'll breeze through these because they were just absolutely superstar performances by 2 rookies, 2 that we knew would ball out this week. Maserati Marv, wide receiver 1, 4 catches, 8 targets, 130, 2 touchdowns, 3 catches of 20-plus yards. He's here. And if you doubted him, that's on you. You're a fool. And I'm glad that this happened to you because we always knew that Maserati was one of those guys. Had a bad week against an amazing defense in the Buffalo Bills. You saw what they did to Tyreek Hill and what they did to Jalen Waddle, but Maserati versus a very poor Rams secondary went out there and lit them up. This is what we expect moving forward from not just him, but of course the Arizona Cardinals. Next name, Malik Neighbors, wide receiver 3, my start of the week, 10 catches, 18 targets, 64% target share for his team. That is a made up number. 64%, and that's something that we anticipated. He would have a super high target share. 64% was not in the cards, but Daniel Jones is a smart guy when he wants to be, and realize this is a mismatch, and we have to throw him the ball as often as we can. He had one of the worst drops of the weekend on 4th down that could have continued and potentially won them the game. It was brutal. It sucked, but all we see is the fantasy performance, and wide receiver 3, you're never complaining. And the last 2 guys that I want to mention, DK Metcalf and JSN, wide receiver 2 and wide receiver 8 respectively, combined 22 catches, 246 yards, a touchdown. What really stands out to me in this performance, though, is JSN 16 targets. This is what we dreamed of, Joel, when we were watching our tape, when it was Garrett Wilson, Olave, and this number 11, who we just can't get out of our mind because he's just standing out every time we're watching the tape. JSN is here. He's arrived. He's running routes all over the field. He's being placed all over the field as well. He has a lot of trust in this Seattle offense, and him and Gino are clicking, and it's going to be beautiful. But this pass offense for Seattle is going to be reminiscent of what it was 2 years ago. It's going to be explosive because there's so many options to go to, and DK and JSN are simply too talented for it not to be. So I'm really excited for what Seattle has in store for us this year.
Even in week 1, right, Tyler Lockett was the more productive wide receiver, but JSN played more snaps. He was running more routes. The underlying numbers said JSN should have had a better week. So in week 2, the fact that he went out there and really had his breakout game, right? This was the game that everyone's been waiting for basically, a year and 2 weeks now, ever since he got drafted. So it was great to see him finally be able to put it all together. Talk about a couple of my studs. Shout out, first of all, Nico Collins, right? Leading the league in yards right now. I think we were both lockstep. Nico Collins is the clear number 1 on this team. Tank Dell and Stephon Diggs, sometimes they're going to be wide receiver 2, sometimes they're going to be 3, sometimes one gets touchdowns, sometimes one doesn't. But Nico's the clear number 1. That should be obvious to everybody who plays fantasy. The other 2 I want to shout out, I think there's been 3 draft picks so far this year that have been just absolute home runs. Alvin Kamara, where he was drafted, absolute steal. J.K. Dobbins, but Chris Godwin. Chris Godwin has been sensational so far for fantasy football. Through 2 weeks, he's had 15 catchable targets. He has 15 catches, 200 yards, a perfect 158.3 passer rating when targeted, the highest graded wide receiver per PFF, and the only wide receiver to score 20-plus points in week 1 and week 2. I was super excited to see him move back to a slot role. He's playing 65% of his snaps in the slot, putting up 3.9 yards per route run. He's been amazing for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and I don't think this is a fad. I don't think this is facade. This is something that Chris Godwin has shown when he's healthy and he's in the slot, he could be a league winner, and I expect him to do this all season long. The other receiver that I want to shout out is Rashid Shaheed. Wide receiver 9 through 2 weeks, only 9 targets. But again, that's because the Saints are 30th in pass attempts through 2 weeks this season because he has a team-high 23% target share. So as this Saints offense really starts to throw the ball more, they've been super efficient. But as just the natural volume goes up in this offense, Rashid Shaheed should also, logically see more targets. But those 9 targets has turned into 170 yards and 2 touchdowns, 4.8 yards per route run. He's kind of a discount Jameson Williams right now to me, right? I think both of these guys are flex-worthy players who have insane upside because they're going to be 2 of the fastest players on the field any given play. We've seen Rashid Shaheed used a bit in the screen game as well as underneath. Of course, he could take the top off the defense, but everyone's super high on Jameson Williams. First-round pick, Alabama, super great prospect. I get all of that. Rashid Shaheed on the football field, though, he's a phenomenal player in his own right. He doesn't have the name values of guys Jameson Williams, but when I look at just their play styles and what they could bring to your fantasy football team, this is someone that I don't know if he's locked in yet as a must start, but he's someone, especially if you're in like a double flex league, right, where you could start up to 4 wide receivers potentially. He's someone that should obviously be rostered, and it's probably going to be hard to find a guy that is a better wide receiver 3 or 4 than him.
In regular leagues, Rashid Shaheed in PPR is the 9th best wide receiver. In our league, in yours and mine league, he is the wide receiver 1. That is insane. Those bonuses bless, but he is a big play machine. So that's something I thought that I'd share with you guys. But let's get into the wide receiver duds. George Pickens, wide receiver 59, my sit of the week. And now I'm not even here gloating about that, because it was the best 2 for 29 I've ever seen in my life. If you guys did not happen to watch the game and you missed it, 51-yard catch over PS2 was called back on an offensive holding by Broderick Jones. He had a 6-yard touchdown that was called back because of offensive pass interference. And also Pat Surtain did or may have not interfere with him on a 37-yard call that got called for DPI. And again, he finished with 4.9 fantasy points. Don't worry about it. He's near unguardable. He's one of those guys. And Justin Fields loves him. He's throwing the ball to him often. Play him. Be confident in that play. Xavier Worthy, wide receiver 66, 2 catches, 4 targets, 17 yards. A carry for 5 yards, 4.2 fantasy points. That's just what's going to happen in this Kansas City offense unless your name's Rashid Rice. It's that simple. If you're not Rashid Rice, I don't feel confident in you. And right now, that includes Travis Kelce. Next name, Amari Cooper, wide receiver 67, 4.1 fantasy points, 3 catches, 8 targets, 11 yards. Eesh, not great. Not a great showing for Amari Cooper right now. Has not been great through these first 2 weeks. Jerry Jeudy has stood out of the bunch so far and been one of the favorite targets for Deshaun Watson so far. But Amari Cooper, who was obviously drafted to be the wide receiver 1, was Joe Flacco's number 1 guy, was one of the standouts of last season. We haven't seen that so far through the first 2 weeks, and this one's becoming concerning for me personally.
I'll move on to a couple of my duds. I'll get this one out of the way because there's not much to talk about because you're starting him every week. But Tyreek Hill obviously takes a pretty big downgrade with Tua out. Without Tua, Tyreek is averaging about 6 catches for 74 yards, has not caught a touchdown. That's about a 30-yard decrease than when he has Tua on the field. Skylar Thompson sucks. They just signed Snoop Huntley as well off the Ravens practice squad, who is going to have to come in, learn the offense. He's not going to come in week 3 and start all of a sudden. Even if he does start, it's not like Tyreek Hill is going to be this dominant receiver again like he is when Tua's on the field. We don't know how long Tua is going to be out. It's a minimum of a week. He has said he's not retiring. He's not thinking of retiring. So we're expecting him to come back this season. Honestly, he's probably not going to get placed on IR. So it's probably going to be a 2 to 3 week absence, in my opinion. Once he's back, Tyreek Hill goes back to that wide receiver 1 overall type of world. But with Skylar Thompson there, he's probably more of a high-end wide receiver too. So just something you have to take account of when you're setting your lineups. The other 2 wide receivers I want to talk about, one I'm a bit worried about, one I'm not worried about. I'm not freaking out about Chris Olave just yet. I'm not freaking out about him just yet. It's one of the best offenses in football, and everyone around him is eating, right? We just talked about Rashid Shaheed. We talked about how great Alvin Kamara has been, the best value arguably in all of fantasy football. Olave's time just hasn't come yet. As I mentioned before, Derek Carr, 30th in pass attempts. Week 2 was more encouraging, though. He saw 40% of the team targets, 57% of the team air yards, had 80 receptions on 4 catches. I think his days of, being a potential top 15 receiver, maybe just a week or 2 away. I know where you drafted him. You're expecting him to perform like that, and he hasn't gotten there quite yet. But this offense has been way too good to feel any sort of need to go out and shop Chris Olave. I would be doing the opposite. I would be going out and seeing if that Chris Olave manager is freaking out and go and see if you could trade for him, because I think better days are to come. The receiver I am worried about, Terry McLaurin. Terry McLaurin in this Cliff Kingsbury offense is not getting moved around. He is primarily playing on the outside. He is not putting him in position really to succeed. He's saying, we're going to line you up at X on one side of the field, and you got to make something happen. And unfortunately, it hasn't worked out for Terry McLaurin. Averaged up the target of 3.9 yards in this offense. He's on pace for 68 receptions for 330 yards. It's really been bad for Terry. And in this offense, it's hard to see a world where he's able to turn around and return any sort of like wide receiver 2 value. There's a world I could see down the line as time progresses that him and Jaden Daniels get some more chemistry. But I'm looking at him and guys like Jameson Williams or guys like Rashid Shaheed, who are late round draft picks, waiver wire pickups. And I'm like, going into next week, would I rather start Terry McLaurin or these guys? I'd rather start Rashid Shaheed. I'd rather start Jameson Williams. Terry McLaurin, until he proves it to me, he's not someone I want in my fantasy lineup.
It sucks because I was very high on Terry, especially as one of those middling round kind of guys. Number one option with a rookie quarterback. Usually that leads to being force-fed targets. But shame on me for not understanding that Cliff Kingsbury hates his wide receivers. That's on me, and I should have took that into my analysis. But we'll see what happens. I really liked what I've seen from Jaden Daniels. He's really taking care of the ball. He's been smart. Noah Brown's one of these guys that I'm keeping an eye on. I thought it'd be Luke McCaffrey, but Noah Brown went out there and balled versus the New York Giants. So Commanders are actually an interesting / fun watch, a pretty fun offense, although it doesn't lead to a lot of touchdowns. I mean, there's a lot of personnel on that team that excites me and something to look forward to in the future. But let's move on to our tight end studs. There's the obvious George Kittle who finished as your tight end 1, but then you have Hunter Henry who finishes as your tight end 2. 8 catches, 12 targets. That's interesting. 109 yards. Finishes as your tight end 2 without getting to the end zone. Usually that doesn't happen at the tight end position. You need your yards to finish. Something I noticed actually that was interesting, and I should have mentioned this in the running back stats. Brian Robinson had the second most rushing yards this week behind Josh Jacobs. Can you guess what he finished as?
Second most rushing yards?
Second most rushing yards. Where was his running back finish this week?
Oh, running back finish. Oh, well, they didn't score a touchdown, right? They scored 7 field goals.
Correct.
Running back 18.
He actually was running back 19. I thought you nailed it. Running back 19 touchdowns. It's unbelievable how valuable they are. But to get back on the conversation of Hunter Henry, it's interesting because I am a Dalton Kincaid manager. In the few tight end leagues that I have Mark Andrews. I have Dalton Kincaid. I have also McBride in a good amount of leagues, thankfully. But those that I have Andrews and I have Kincaid, I'm a little bit more optimistic about Kincaid because I have to be. But I'm interested in Hunter Henry. Hunter Henry's been one of those sneaky tight end options every single season. But Jacoby understands I need a reliable option. If he sees that in Hunter Henry, this is one I'm keeping an eye on. I really think that Hunter Henry is someone who obviously has pretty big upside when it comes to touchdowns. Although he didn't have one in this game, he has shown that in the past to be one of the more reliable red zone options. Hunter Henry, that's one that I'm keeping in the back pocket.
I'll throw this tight end into the mix of best draft picks so far. We're talking about Kamara, Godwin, J.K. Dobbins. Brock Bowers is looking like a potential league winner this year. Against the Ravens, 9 receptions for 98 yards, 15 receptions through 2 games, most by a rookie tight end since 1960, 156 receiving yards through 2 games, most from a tight end since 2000. We knew how great of a prospect Brock Bowers was going to be, but I was not expecting him to be this good this early on. You were worried about the Raiders offense, who all offseason we're talking about, we're going to run the ball, we're going to play defense. We thought it was going to be a slow-paced offense. We knew Gardner Minshew was going to be in there, and he could be wildly inconsistent, high highs, low lows. But Brock Bowers is the number 2 option on this team. Devontae Adams is number 1. Brock is number 2. He has overtaken Jacoby Myers, Michael Mayer. Yeah, see you later, buddy. You could go play fullback or some shit. But Brock Bowers is the dude in this offense. And the other name I want to throw out there, you mentioned Hunter Henry. I think Zach Ertz is probably one of the better streaming tight ends right now. Talk about rookie quarterbacks. They love their tight ends. He has the 8th highest target share amongst all tight ends, higher than guys like Kelsey, Kincaid, and Sam Laporta. He's just too involved on this Washington team to be on waivers. So, again, there's a lot of ugly tight end rooms right now. If Zach Ertz is out there on waivers, it's not a sexy pick. He's probably not going to score you 20 points, but he should be involved week to week where he gets you a pretty solid floor.
Now, on to the tight end duds in the last part of the show. Sam Laporta, tight end 26, 2 catches, 3 targets, 13 yards. 2 weeks in a row, Joel, that we're talking about Sam Laporta and we're underwhelmed. Are we panicking? Are we looking at Jared Goff and asking him what the hell is going on? Is this a Jared Goff problem? I would lean that more so than blaming Laporta. but are we panicking yet? Or are we staying optimistic because people used a top 4 round draft pick on this guy?
Yeah, it's a bit scary. I saw one stat. He has a 9% first read rate, so that's super low. 10% target share. I think a couple things are going on. Number one, the offense feels a bit broken right now. Right, we mentioned how 55 pass attempts should not happen for this Detroit offense. Right, really, no matter what, you have too good of a running game to just completely abandon it. But also, Jameson Williams kind of changes the outlook of this team, the way he's played these first 2 weeks. And then you have Amon-Ra bouncing back the way he did in week 2, had 20 targets. So Sam Laporta last year, he was a revelation, right? Double-digit touchdowns, had 10 touchdowns, best rookie tight end season we had seen in a while from fantasy perspective, the best tight end rookie tight end season we had ever seen. I'm not panicking on Laporta yet. He's too talented to panic on. The offense is too good. The play calling is too good. But I do think that week-to-week stability that we saw last year from Laporta, I think it's shown so far this year with Jameson Williams being more involved and just being kind of a focal point of this offense, right? It's a team and a regime that spent a first-round pick on a guy. They want him to work out. Of course, they spent a second on Laporta. But if you have Jameson Williams, Amon-Ra, 2 running backs you want to get involved, and Sam Laporta, week to week, there's just going to be guys that get kind of naturally thrown out of the offense. And I think the first 2 weeks it's been Laporta. He's going to have good games in the future, but expecting just this dominant run where he goes on, a 10 touchdown streak like he did last year, I am a bit worried about that.
All right, listen, move on to your tight end duds and we'll wrap this bitch up.
So last tight end dud, the Ravens tight ends, Mark Andrews, Isaiah Likely. After week 1, we told you it's okay to panic a bit on Mark Andrews because Isaiah Likely is too talented to not be involved in this offense. But what we saw in week 2 is just Isaiah Likely is kind of a thorn in Mark Andrews' side, at least in week 2. And it's not going to be enough usage to make Isaiah Likely a weekly starter, but it's going to be enough to hinder what Mark Andrews can do. In week 2, Andrews ran 78% of the routes, but only saw 16% of the targets. Isaiah Likely 50% of the routes, 10% of the targets, which is a drastic decrease that we saw in week 1 against the Chiefs. So I know a lot of people went out there and spent a ton of fab on Isaiah Likely, expecting him to be this breakout 2 tight end type of personnel that we were hoping to see. Week 1, we saw it, and then week 2, it kind of didn't see it in a game that the Ravens were in a dogfight against the Raiders in. It's not like they're up 20 points and we could kind of have an excuse, but this was a neutral game script. This was a game where the Ravens had to throw the ball, and even still, Isaiah Likely wasn't featured like we were expecting him to be. So I think going into week 3, Isaiah Likely is far from a must start. And Mark Andrews, you probably don't have a better option at tight end, right? Unless you were able to snag Brock Bowers, somehow he went undrafted or something. You probably have to start Mark Andrews, but right now I'm not excited to start either of these guys.
Before we wrap up the show, I'm going to go over the list of injuries that we have so far through 2 weeks of the NFL season. We have Jordan Love, 3 to 4 weeks. Tua, multiple weeks. McCaffrey on the IR. We have Pacheco, around 6 to 8 weeks, is being placed on the IR. Ken Walker, probably out for multiple weeks. Tajay Spears, we're still waiting to find out. Raheem Mostert, Joe Mixon, who probably is going to be okay, thankfully. Puka Nacua out for multiple weeks. Cooper Kupp out for multiple weeks. Keenan Allen, we'll see, seems to be week to week. Hollywood Brown, looking like season-ending injury. T. Higgins, he's been out for 2 weeks. Hopefully he's back next week. A.J. Brown, looking like he could miss multiple weeks. Jordan Addison, multiple weeks. Josh Downs, he had an injury coming in. Deebo Samuel now picks up an injury, and he's out a couple of weeks. Evan Ingram just picked up a hamstring injury. David Njoku's out multiple weeks. Jake Ferguson missed this week. Don't know about his status for this upcoming week as well. Jesus Christ. Please look over these guys. This is insane. And the names that we listed are some of the best guys at the position. It's been a cruel, cruel fantasy season for some managers, hoping that you guys aren't one of those guys. But of course, we're hoping the best for these NFL players. It's a grueling game. We understand that. Every single season we come here and we talk about inevitable injuries, and it always, always hurts the same. But hopefully these guys can get back on the field soon. Forget about fantasy purposes, but just on a human aspect, hoping the best for these guys. But that's going to do it from us over here at the Fantasy Reaction Show. If you stuck around this long, 1, We appreciate you guys, and you guys are the GOAT. But if you guys are here, leave a like on this video, subscribe to the channel, turn on the notification bell so you know we go live like nights like tonight. Tune into the Pigside Podcast, Riv Academy, if and whenever that drops ever again, the Joel Moran Show on his channel, and of course, the Fantasy Reaction Show. But that's going to do it from us over here, and we'll see you guys next time.